The silverware clinked like tiny bells, grown-up voices rising and falling in waves I couldn't see but could feel. I sat at the long gold table, my feet not even touching the ground, my cane leaning against the chair like a secret I wasn't supposed to have. They were my father's people, men in deep voices, women who smelled of perfume that stung my nose, all of them talking about numbers and money, never about me. I was Amara Cole, 8 years old, blind and invisible, the daughter of the richest black man in the city. Yet in that room I was smaller than the glass of water in front of me. Nobody asked me anything. Nobody even said hello. They laughed around me, their forks scraping, their words skipping like stones across a lake I could never step into. I learned to sit still, to listen, but every time I listened, I found out the truth. They didn't think I mattered. Then it happened. When the fish was placed in front of me, my hand touched the napkin folded by my plate. At first it was just cloth, but then my fingers felt bumps, small, raised dots pressed into the edge. My heart skipped. Braille. Someone had written to me. My finger traced carefully, slowly, the way my teacher had shown me. The letters spelled out, "Do not drink." My chest felt like a drum. I touched the cool glass by my hand, lifted it just enough to smell. Lemon. But underneath, something else. Sharp, bitter, like a coin melted into water. I froze. I leaned closer to my father at the head of the table. His voice was low, commanding, the kind of voice that filled entire rooms, but it always softened when he said my name. "Yes, Amara?" he asked, surprised, because I never spoke at these dinners. I whispered, "Don't drink the water." Chairs stopped moving. Forks stopped scraping. The whole table froze. Someone laughed nervously, saying I was just a child with imagination. But my father didn't laugh. He set his glass down. The air grew heavy like before a storm. A guard stepped forward, checking the drink. Then came the whispers, the shuffle of shoes, the excuse of a mistake from a server who had already disappeared. The glass, they later said, held something that could have made my father sleepy. Too sleepy to vote tonight. I sat very still, but inside me something grew. Power, fear, both. When dinner ended, Father touched my shoulder gently and said, "Walk with me." His steps were steady, mine small and quick to keep up. The hallway smelled of old books and leather. He said, "You've been quiet all your life, and I thought it meant you had nothing to say. Tonight you proved me wrong." I held the napkin in my hand like treasure. "Somebody spoke to me," I whispered, "through Braille. They knew I was the only one who could read it." My father's silence was long and heavy, but finally he placed something small in my hand, his cufflink, cool and solid, with the company's lion crest carved on it. "This is yours now. Whenever you feel afraid, hold the lion. Remember who you are." I curled my fingers around it. The lion's mane scratched against my skin, sharp and real. I didn't know who had warned me. I didn't know why, but I knew this. They had chosen me because nobody else was paying attention. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just the blind little girl at the table. I was the only one who could see what others couldn't, and this was just the beginning. That night I couldn't sleep. My room was too quiet, and when the house was quiet, it meant people were whispering somewhere else. I sat up in bed, fingers wrapped tight around the lion cufflink Father had given me. Its edges dug into my palm, sharp enough to hurt, but I didn't let go. Pain made me feel awake, made me remember that what had happened at dinner was real. At 8 years old, I wasn't supposed to know about corporate takeovers or proxy votes, but being blind teaches you how to listen. When people think you can't see, they also think you can't hear, and that's their mistake. I had overheard enough to know that the meeting tonight wasn't about numbers on a page. It was about who controlled everything my father built. I heard footsteps outside my door. My nanny, Miss Ruth, peeked in, her slippers brushing against the rug. "Baby, you should rest," she whispered. Her voice was warm and careful, the way people speak to children who break too easily. "Tomorrow's a big day for your daddy." I tilted my face toward her. "Someone talked to me in Braille, Miss Ruth. They saved Daddy." She paused, long enough for me to feel the air change. Then she sighed. "The Lord sends angels in many forms, child." She closed the door, but I heard her mutter as she walked away, "Or devils." I lay back down, but the napkin was still folded on my nightstand, its bumps carved into the cloth like a hidden scar. Who had written it? Nobody in Father's circle cared enough to speak to me, let alone save him, which meant one of two things. Either a friend was hiding in the shadows, or an enemy was playing a longer game. The next morning, Father called me into his study. His office smelled of cedar and coffee, the blinds half drawn against the city's buzz. "Amara," he said, "do you know what it means to be my daughter?" I held the cufflink in my fist. "It means nobody listens to me," I said. He chuckled, but it was hollow. "It means one day everything I built will be yours?" I blinked at the blur of light behind my eyelids. I was 8. I liked dolls and Braille storybooks, and the way Miss Ruth sang old gospel hymns. An empire was too big for me to imagine. But I knew one thing. If people ignored me now, they would try to erase me later. He knelt down close enough that I could feel the heat of his breath. "There are men who want to take this company away from us. Last night someone tried to drug me so I'd lose control of the vote. If they win, our name means nothing. Our name means something because of us," I said. Father was quiet for a long time, then kissed the top of my head. "You're more like me than I realized." But even as he said it, the door creaked and I heard the faintest rustle of fabric. Someone had been listening. Later, when Father left for his meeting, I sat cross-legged on the floor, running my fingers over the napkin again and again. That's when I found it. More dots, faint, almost hidden near the corner. A second message. My heart thumped as I read it. "They are inside. Trust no one." The words burned into me. Inside. That meant here. Our home. I stuffed the napkin under my pillow just as Miss Ruth entered. "Time for your lessons, baby." But her voice, it didn't sound the same. Too careful. Too sweet. As I took her hand, I wondered if she was one of them. The lion cufflink pressed against my palm. I didn't let go, because now I knew the battle for my father's empire wasn't only in the boardroom. It was already inside these walls, and I was the only one who could feel it. The morning stretched long, every tick of the clock loud as a hammer. Miss Ruth's hand guided mine across the Braille reader, but the words blurred together. I couldn't stop thinking about the hidden message on the napkin. "They are inside. Trust no one." The phrase beat like a drum inside my chest. Miss Ruth's voice floated over me, reading from the lesson book, but there was something in it I had never noticed before. Too much sweetness, like sugar hiding a bitter taste. I traced the lion cufflink in my pocket, the mane catching under my finger, and tried to steady my breathing. "Amara," she said gently, "why don't you tell me what you read last night?" Her question startled me. She never asked about dinner. Nobody did. Everyone treated those nights as though I were invisible furniture. I pressed my lips together. "I don't remember," I lied. A pause. Then her fingers patted my shoulder, lingering a moment too long. "That's all right, baby. That's all right." I nodded, but inside my stomach twisted. If the warning was true, then anyone close enough to touch me could be the enemy, even Miss Ruth. When Father returned from his meeting, his shoes heavy against the marble floor, I knew before he spoke that something was wrong. "We held them off," he said, voice firm but tired. "Barely, they'll try again." I sat up straighter. "Who are they?" He hesitated, then pulled me into his lap. I could feel the rise and fall of his chest as he said, "People who think I don't deserve this company. People who think our name is too dark for glass towers." I understood. Even at 8, I knew what it meant to walk through the world in our skin. I had heard the whispers at school, the ones that thought blindness made me weak and blackness made me less. But Father always told me, "We are made of stone and fire. They cannot break us." Still, fire could burn both ways. That evening the house was noisier than usual, phones ringing, doors opening and closing, footsteps rushing like waves. I sat by the study, ears open, cane across my knees. Through the wood of the door, I caught fragments of voices. "If she suspects, child doesn't know anything. You'd be surprised." The voices stopped when I knocked. "Who is it?" Father called. "Me," I said. He opened the door, letting me in. His office was thick with the smell of cigar smoke and sweat, though Father never smoked. Someone else had been there. He dismissed the room, and I heard the shuffle of bodies leaving. "Amara," he said softly, "why were you outside?" "Because I hear better there," I answered. He chuckled, but it was tired. "One day this company will be yours, but right now, I need you to be a child." "I can't," I whispered. "Not anymore." I placed the napkin in his hand. His silence stretched as he felt the raised dots. "Who gave you this?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "But they know Braille. They know me. That means they're close." Father's breath sharpened. He folded the napkin carefully and locked it in his desk drawer. Then we trust no one. That night I dreamed of lions. They prowled through hallways that smelled like cedar and old perfume, their paws soft but their growls rumbling low. One lion bent down, its mane brushing my cheek, and whispered, "They are already here." I woke sweating, clutching the cufflink so tight the crest cut into my skin. Somewhere in the house a floorboard creaked, though it was hours past midnight. I held my breath, listening. The steps paused at my door, then came the faintest sound, a slip of paper sliding under the wood. I scrambled out of bed, fingers trembling as I searched the floor until I found it. The edges were rough, but the bumps were clear. I read by touch, and the message made my blood run cold. "Your father will not see the morning." The paper shook in my hands, though I tried to steady it against the floorboards. "Your father will not see the morning." My fingertips traced it again and again, as if rereading might change the meaning. But the bumps didn't lie. Whoever had left this wanted me to know that danger wasn't waiting in boardrooms or across oceans. It was here now, in the same house where I was supposed to be safe. I clutched the note to my chest, then slid it under my pillow with the napkin. The lion cufflink pressed into my palm until my skin stung. My heart told me to run to father, to shout the warning, but another voice whispered that the wrong ears might hear. Whoever wrote this message knew Braille. That narrowed the circle. And if they could move silently through my house at night, then they were bold. I lay awake until dawn, listening to the creaks and sighs of the mansion. When father's footsteps finally crossed the marble downstairs, I ran to him, bare feet cold against the stone. "Daddy," I whispered, tugging his sleeve. He crouched down. "What is it, lioness?" I pressed the paper into his hand. His fingers brushed the dots clumsily, untrained, but I spelled it aloud for him. When I finished, he was silent for so long, I thought he hadn't believed me. Then his voice came low, dangerous. "You're not safe here." "I'm with you," I said quickly, clutching his arm. "No," he said firmly, though his hand trembled against my shoulder. "You will stay close to me, always. No more lessons, no more wandering the halls. If someone is inside this house, then I need you where I can see you." I almost smiled at the irony. He wanted to see me, but it was I who had seen what no one else could. That day, the house turned into a fortress. Security guards filled every hallway. Dogs barked in the courtyard. Doors that were always open clicked shut behind locks. Still, I felt the same chill on my neck, as if unseen eyes followed me from shadow to shadow. At lunch, I sat beside father in the private dining room. Plates clattered, and the air smelled of roasted chicken. My hand hovered over the glass set at my place, waiting for the bumps. But there were none. Just smooth linen. I leaned against father's arm. "They'll try again." He stroked my braids with a gentleness he rarely showed. "Let them try. They'll learn what it means to challenge a coal." But his voice carried a strain I had never heard before, a crack in the stone. After the meal, Miss Ruth came to fetch me. Her perfume drifted close, powdery and sharp. "Come, baby, let's get you ready for your nap." Father started to protest, but she cut in sweetly. "I'll sit right outside her door, sir. You know I always protect her." He agreed, reluctantly. I followed her up the stairs, clutching the cufflink like it could roar for me. When she closed my bedroom door, I didn't lie down. Instead, I sat on the edge of my bed, listening. Her footsteps didn't fade into the hallway. They hovered, right outside. And then, a whisper. Not to me, but to someone else. Low, rushed. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the rhythm of secrets. I pressed my ear to the door, the wood cool against my cheek. "Tonight. Be ready. Child doesn't suspect." My pulse raced. They were wrong, I did suspect. I moved back to my bed, heart hammering, and waited until the footsteps left. Then I dug under my pillow for the note and napkin. Whoever the secret messenger was, they wanted me alive. They wanted me to know. But why? That evening, father called a meeting in the great hall. The room echoed with the shuffle of bodies, the hiss of whispers, the clink of jewelry. I sat beside him, my cane across my knees, trying to count the voices. Too many. Too loud. Then, against the rush of sound, I felt a hand brush mine. Small, quick. Paper slipped into my palm. I hid it under the table, running my fingers across the bumps as fast as I dared. Midnight. His room. I gasped. Father turned, concern sharp in his tone. "What is it, Amara?" "Nothing," I said quickly, folding the note tight in my fist, because now I knew the truth. Tonight wasn't about proxy votes or company shares. Tonight, someone planned to end my father's life. And the only person who could stop it was me. Midnight was a storm ticking closer with every second. The note burned in my pocket. Midnight. His room. Father thought the house was locked, guarded, safe. But I knew the truth. Walls could not stop enemies already inside. I ate nothing at dinner, just pushed food around my plate. Father noticed but said nothing. He was too busy fielding questions, answering calls, staring at documents that smelled of ink and fresh worry. He kept one hand near me always, as though he feared I might vanish if he let go. When Miss Ruth came to take me upstairs, I clung to him. "I want to stay," I whispered. He kissed my forehead. "You need rest, lioness. Tomorrow will be long." I wanted to scream, to tell him rest was the last thing I could afford, but my throat closed around the words. Instead, I followed Miss Ruth, her steps soft and measured. In my room she tucked me in, humming an old hymn. Her voice should have been comfort, but tonight it carried a strange edge like a blade wrapped in velvet. "Sleep now, baby," she said. "Your daddy has a long life ahead." It sounded like a blessing, but my skin prickled. When the door clicked shut, I lay still, counting breaths. 10, 20, 30. Then I slipped out of bed, my bare feet brushing the carpet. The lion cufflink was in my palm, its edges biting as I clutched it. My cane tapped once against the floor. Then I lifted it. Silence was my only shield. The hall was darker than usual, but I knew the mansion by heart. Each rug, each column, each creak of the wooden stairs was a map etched into my memory. I moved like a shadow, ears straining for every whisper. At Father's door I froze. Voices. 2 of them. One sharp, male, unfamiliar. The other, Miss Ruth. "Are you certain he'll be asleep?" the man hissed. "Certain," Miss Ruth replied, her voice lower, colder than I'd ever heard. "The child is no threat. She's blind. She can't stop us." Blind. No threat. My nails dug into the cufflink until my palm throbbed. They didn't know I was here, listening. The door opened a crack. I pressed flat against the wall, holding my breath. Their footsteps slipped past me, slow, careful, toward Father's bed. I had to act. My mind raced. I couldn't fight them. I was 8, small, unseen. But I could make noise. I could wake him. I lifted my cane and struck the wall with all my strength. The crack echoed like thunder. "What was that?" the man hissed. "Nothing. Just the girl." Father's voice roared from inside, deeper than I had ever heard. "Amara!" The room exploded with sound, shouts, the scrape of furniture, the crash of glass. I stumbled forward, heart pounding, and cried, "Daddy, wake up! They're here!" In seconds, the hall filled with rushing footsteps, guards, too late, but still in time. I felt the air split as bodies collided. A grunt, a scream, then silence heavy as stone. A hand gripped my shoulder. Father. His chest heaved, his breath hot against my hair. "Lioness," he whispered, voice breaking. "You saved me." I wanted to collapse into his arms, but my ears caught something, someone running fast away. Not Miss Ruth, not the man, someone else. The true mastermind hadn't been caught. I turned toward the sound, whispering to myself, "They're not finished." Because tonight wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the war for everything my father had built, everything that one day would belong to me. The house felt different in the morning, quieter but not safe. Guards moved heavier. Their radios crackled more often, and every door seemed to shut too quickly. They said Father was unharmed, that the intruders were caught, but I knew better. You can catch hands, not shadows. And what tried to kill him last night was more shadow than man. Miss Ruth was gone. No one told me where. When I asked, the staff dodged the question, their words slippery as wet stones. "She won't be back, baby," one maid whispered before catching herself and rushing away. That absence cut deeper than I wanted to admit. Ruth had held me when I cried as a toddler, brushed my braids every morning, hummed lullabies when I feared the dark, even though darkness was all I had ever known. Now she was gone, and her humming sounded different in my memory, twisted with secrets. Father kept me close that day, moving me into his office like I was a briefcase he couldn't set down. His desk smelled of cigar smoke and polish, and the constant ringing of phones filled the air. Men with heavy shoes came and went, voices sharp and clipped. "Coal Enterprises is vulnerable," one of them said. "The board sees weakness." "Let them see," Father snapped. "They'll remember who I am soon enough." I sat in the leather chair by the window, fingers tracing the cufflink until the lion's mane left tiny ridges on my skin. Nobody spoke to me. They never did, but I listened, and what I heard was war. When the room finally emptied, I whispered, "Daddy, they think you're weak." He sighed, lowering himself into the chair beside me. His hand brushed mine, rough and steady. "They've always thought that. Black, from nothing, self-made. Now blind, daughter. To them, weakness is all they see." "But we're still here," I said. His laugh was short, tired. "Yes, lioness, we're still here." That night I found another message, not slipped under my door, not hidden in napkins. This one was waiting on my pillow when I entered my room, folded neatly, the dots pressed deep into the paper. My heart skipped as I read. She wasn't alone. "Trust yourself." I sat hard on the bed, the paper trembling in my hands. She had to be Miss Ruth, but the message meant there were others. Not just one betrayal, a nest. I whispered to the empty room, "Why me? Why tell me?" The paper gave no answer, only the bumps, cold and firm, reminding me that somewhere in this house, someone wanted me to know the truth. Later, Father came in, sitting on the edge of my bed. His voice was softer than I had ever heard. "Amara, I should have seen it sooner. You are my eyes." I reached for his hand. "Then you can't send me away." "Send you away?" His voice tensed. "The others will say I'm too young, too blind, that I don't belong. But last night, if I hadn't listened, you wouldn't be here. And if they come again, I'll listen harder." He kissed the top of my head. His silence was an answer. He didn't want me in danger, but he knew there was no safe place left. I fell asleep holding his hand, but the night was restless. Dreams of lions came again, their paws padding down endless hallways. One lion turned to me, mane heavy with fire, and said, "The throne is already yours, but they will kill you for it." I woke, gasping, the cufflink clutched tight in my fist, and as dawn spread across the city, one truth pressed against my skin as sharp as the lion's mane. I was only 8 years old, blind, black, ignored, but I was also heir to an empire, and they would have to kill me to take it. The next days passed like a storm with no rain, clouds heavy, thunder waiting, but no relief. Guards doubled at the gates, strangers filled the halls, and Father's voice grew sharper, more frayed each time he hung up the phone. I stayed close, listening, learning. Nobody asked me what I thought, but I was beginning to realize that silence was my armor. When people think you're not paying attention, they let their secrets spill. On the third night, another note appeared. This time, it was slipped into one of my Braille storybooks. My fingers brushed the dots, and I froze. "Know the numbers. The lion is hungry. Numbers." My chest tightened. They didn't mean math homework. They meant the company's numbers, the lifeblood of Father's empire. Whoever this messenger was, they weren't just warning me. They were teaching me. At breakfast, while Father barked orders into the phone, I ran my fingers along the cufflink, remembering the lion carved into it. Hungry. I thought about what lions eat: meat, flesh, survival. The company was the lion. If it didn't feed, it would die. That afternoon, I snuck into Father's study. My cane tapped gently against the wood floor as I felt my way to the desk. Papers were stacked high, edges rough under my fingertips. Contracts, charts, things I couldn't see but could feel. I slid my hand across until I found a single sheet embossed in Braille. My heart skipped. It wasn't a warning. It was a lesson. Rows of raised numbers, dots arranged in a rhythm I recognized from school. Balance sheets. Profit. Loss. Someone had translated financial records into my language, hidden among the chaos of Father's desk. I traced the figures, mouthing them softly, and though I didn't understand all of it, one truth was clear. The lion was starving. Money was vanishing faster than it was earned. The empire everyone envied was bleeding. "Amara?" Father's voice boomed suddenly, and I jumped, dropping the paper. His footsteps crossed the room, and then his hand landed heavy on my shoulder. "What are you doing here?" I clutched the paper tight. "Reading." He sighed, weariness wrapping his words. "These aren't for you, lioness." "But they are," I insisted. "If it's mine one day, then I have to learn." His silence stretched, thick as smoke. Then he crouched, his breath warm against my cheek. "Who gave you this?" I swallowed. The truth might lock me away from the only ally I had. "I found it," I whispered. Father didn't believe me, but he didn't press. He only took the sheet, folded it carefully and locked it away. The less you know, the safer you are. But I knew safety was already gone. That night, another note waited under my pillow. Trust your ears. The board meets tomorrow. They will try again. I pressed the paper to my chest. Whoever this ally was, they weren't just warning me anymore. They were preparing me. The next morning, I insisted on going with Father. Please, I begged, let me be there. He tried to refuse, but I held the lion cufflink out to him. You gave me this because I'm your eyes. Don't close them now. For the first time, he looked at me not as his fragile child, but as something else. An heir. All right, he said at last, but you stay by my side. When the car pulled away from the mansion, the city sounds rushed in, horns blaring, vendors shouting, tires hissing on wet streets. I pressed my forehead to the glass, though I couldn't see, and whispered to myself, trust your ears. Tomorrow the board would meet. Tomorrow they would try again, and tomorrow I would be ready. The boardroom was colder than the mansion, the air sharp with polished wood, and the faint hiss of the city far below the glass walls. My cane tapped across marble as Father guided me to a seat beside him. The men and women at the table shifted in their leather chairs, their perfume and cologne clashing like an orchestra out of tune. They weren't used to me being here. They weren't used to seeing me at all. Father's voice was iron when he spoke. This is my daughter, Amara. She will sit here. She will listen. The silence that followed told me everything. They didn't want me here. To them, I was 8, blind and useless. But they were wrong. I had the napkin, the notes, the lion in my pocket, and ears sharper than their sharpest lawyer. The meeting began. Papers rustled. Pens scratched. Words like merger, shareholder value, acquisition filled the air. I sat quietly, hands folded, listening harder than ever. Every cough, every nervous shift in a chair told me more than their words. Then I heard it, a whisper, barely audible to my left. Tonight, if he doesn't sign, we force the vote. I turned my head, pretending to adjust my cane. The voice belonged to Mr. Halpin, one of Father's oldest executives. His tone was slick, serpentine. Father's own voice cut through. You push this vote, and you destroy what we've built. Halpin's reply was steady, but I heard the tremor he tried to hide. What you've built is no longer sustainable. It's time for new leadership. My small hand slid into Father's palm under the table. He squeezed it once, firm, then let go. His silence after that was a storm building behind closed doors. When the meeting ended, Father's allies, few as they were, left quickly. Halpin lingered, speaking quietly to another man. I leaned closer, catching fragments. She doesn't matter. Just a child. She can't stop us. I wanted to shout, to tell them I heard everything. But my fingers pressed the cufflink instead. The lion was patient. The lion waited for the kill. That night, in the mansion, the message came earlier than usual. Slipped under my door before dinner, folded neatly. My breath caught as I traced the dots. The serpent strikes with a pen, not a knife. Watch his hand, Halpin. It had to be. At dinner, I told Father what I'd read, my voice small but steady. They said the serpent uses a pen. That means contracts, signatures. You can't sign anything tonight. Father's chair scraped back. Amara, who is sending you these messages? I don't know, I whispered, but they know more than we do. He stood abruptly, his hand on my shoulder. Then we listen. Together. Hours later, in his study, Halpin arrived. I smelled his cologne before I heard his voice, sharp, chemical, false. Papers slid across the desk. It's just a precaution, he said smoothly. Sign, and tomorrow's vote will be meaningless. I stepped forward. Don't. Halpin chuckled, condescending. Sweet child, you don't understand business. But Father's voice was steel. She understands more than you think. The room tightened. Halpin shifted. The papers crinkled. I heard his pen click. The serpent was ready to strike. Father tore the papers in half. The sound was thunder in the quiet room. Halpin's mask slipped. His voice dropped to a hiss. You'll regret this. He left, the door slamming behind him, but the echo of his threat stayed. Father knelt, his hands gripping my arms. His voice cracked for the first time. Lioness, without you, I would have signed. You saved me again. I leaned close, whispering the truth he didn't want to hear. It's not over. And deep in the shadows of the house, I knew someone else was listening. The morning after Father tore the contract, the mansion felt heavier, as if the walls themselves were bracing for a blow. Guards moved like shadows, radios buzzing low, but their presence didn't comfort me. I had learned the truth. The enemy didn't always climb the gates. Sometimes the enemy sat at your own table. At breakfast, Father tried to act calm, but I heard the tightness in his fork against the plate, the way his breath shortened between bites. "The board votes today," he said. "They'll come harder than ever." I sat up straighter. "Then I should come too," he sighed. "Amara, this isn't a place for children." My hand pressed the lion cufflink so deep into my palm it hurt. Neither is betrayal, but here we are. He looked at me then, really looked, though my eyes could not return the gaze. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his hand touched mine, warm and trembling. "All right, you'll be there." That afternoon we returned to the glass tower where the boardroom waited. The air reeked of tension and perfume. As we entered, whispers rippled like snakes through tall grass. "She brings the child." Ridiculous. Desperate. I kept my head high, cane tapping steady. They didn't know that every tap was a drumbeat, every step a promise. I would not be invisible anymore. The meeting began. Voices clashed like swords, arguments over numbers, over leadership, over the very bones of the empire. I sat still, hands folded, listening. Then I heard it. A sound no one else noticed. The quick flutter of paper being slipped down the table, followed by a faint scratch of a pen. Someone was signing something quietly beneath the noise. I shot up from my seat. "Stop!" My voice cracked across the room like glass shattering. Every head turned. Father's hand tightened on my shoulder. "Amara!" I pushed forward, cane tapping fast until it struck wood. My fingers brushed the edge of a document sliding across the table. I traced its corner, then the faint bumps along the margin. Braille, hidden like a secret no one else could see. The room gasped. My small hands moved quickly, reading. My breath caught. Transfer of voting power. They were trying to strip Father's authority, sign it away, quietly, under cover of noise. I raised my voice higher, stronger. "They want to take it from you. They want you gone." Chaos erupted. Shouts, denials, chairs scraping. One man lunged to grab the paper, but Father's fist slammed it flat against the table. "Enough!" he roared. His voice shook the walls. The room fell silent. And then Halpin's voice slithered out, calm, mocking. "She's a child, blind. You're really going to let her dictate the future of this company?" The words stung, sharp as knives. But I held my ground. "I may be blind, but I can see you better than anyone here." Gasps circled the table. My voice was small, but it carried weight. Father's hand rested on my shoulder, not to hold me down, but to steady himself. For the first time, I wasn't just his daughter. I was his witness, his ally, his heir. But as the meeting ended, I heard another whisper, faint, almost lost in the shuffle of chairs. "Tonight, end them both." The threat chilled me deeper than any words before. They weren't just coming for Father anymore. They were coming for me too. That night, the mansion's silence was not peace. It was a trap. The halls were too still, the air too heavy. Guards marched outside my door, their radios muttering static, but I didn't trust their presence. The whisper from the boardroom haunted me. "Tonight, end them both." I lay in bed fully dressed, cane across my lap, the lion cufflink clenched tight. I refused to sleep. My ears searched every corner of the dark for the sound of betrayal, and then it came. Not the footsteps I expected, but the soft click of my window opening. I sat up sharply. "Who's there?" A shadow shifted, too quiet for the guards to hear. Then a voice, low and hurried, whispered in Braille, fingers brushing against my hand before I could scream. I stiffened, then felt the bumps. "Trust me. Move now." I didn't recognize the touch, but my body obeyed. I grabbed my cane and crept toward the door. My heart pounded as the stranger's hand guided me past the guards who stood frozen, silent. Something was wrong. Too wrong. The stranger tugged me down the stairs, past the dining hall, toward the back of the house. Then we stopped. "Go," he hissed. "Run." Before I could ask why, the sound came, the thunder of glass shattering, shouts exploding, bullets cracking like lightning. The mansion had erupted into war. I froze, ears flooded with chaos. Men screamed, guards shouted orders, doors slammed. I could smell smoke, sharp and acrid, filling the air. "Daddy!" I screamed, but my voice was swallowed by the noise. The stranger shoved me toward the kitchen. "Hide, girl!" I stumbled forward, terrified, but the lion cufflink dug into my hand, reminding me, lions don't hide. I turned back. Cane clutched like a weapon. The air carried Father's voice, roaring commands, then cutting short with a grunt that twisted my stomach. I ran. My feet slapped against marble, my cane clattering as I followed the sound of his struggle. The study. He was in the study. When I reached the door, my hands shook against the wood. Inside, the smell of blood hit me, metallic and sharp. "Amara," Father's voice rasped, weak, broken. I stumbled in, my cane sweeping until it struck something soft. Him. I fell to my knees beside him, hands searching his body. My fingers met wetness. Warm. Sticky. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." His hand found mine, trembling. "Lioness," he said, voice fading, "you must be stronger than me." "Don't say that," I begged, tears burning my cheeks. "You're not leaving me." He pressed something into my palm, not the cufflink. I still held that. This was heavier. A key. Cold. Jagged. "This unlocks everything," he whispered. "The company, the accounts, the empire. They'll try to take it, but it's yours. Promise me, Amara. Promise me you'll fight." "I promise," I sobbed, clinging to his hand. He exhaled one final time, his grip loosening until his hand slipped from mine. The world collapsed around me. Shouts grew closer, boots pounding toward the study. I curled around Father's body, clutching the key and cufflink in my fists, my tears soaking his suit. They thought killing him would end it, but they didn't understand. His empire was still alive, because it was in me now, and they would have to tear it from my hands. The mansion draped itself in silence the morning after Father's death, not the protective silence of guards or the stillness of old stone, but a hollow silence, like the air had been carved out of the world. Servants moved softly, their shoes whispering against marble. They avoided my room. They avoided me. Funeral preparations consumed the house. I smelled lilies everywhere, sweet, cloying, suffocating. Strangers' voices echoed in the halls, politicians, executives, journalists. They came not to mourn but to circle, vultures dressed in silk. Miss Ruth was gone, vanished like smoke. Halpin's name floated in every whisper, but no one dared say it loud, not yet. I wore a simple black dress, shoes too tight, hair braided by a maid whose hands trembled as she touched me. They wanted me to look delicate, pitiful, the blind child of a fallen king. But inside me, fire boiled. I wasn't their ornament. I was his heir. At the funeral, the church rang with hymns. I sat in the front row, hands folded around the lion cufflink and the key Father had pressed into me. Every word of the pastor's eulogy felt heavy, too heavy for my small body to carry. Self-made man, visionary, leader. They praised his climb from poverty to power, but no one spoke of the man who tucked me in, who called me lioness, who gave me a piece of himself when he gave me that cufflink. After the service, the board closed in. Halpern's cologne hit me before his words. "Child," he said smoothly, kneeling just enough to feign compassion. "The company needs steady hands now. I'll guide it until you're older." I lifted my face, even though my eyes showed nothing but blur. "You mean until I disappear?" Gasps rippled around us. Halpern chuckled softly, but his voice carried steel. "You're 8 years old, blind. No one here is going to take you seriously." I clenched the cufflink in one hand, the key in the other. "Then they're the blind ones," the crowd murmured, but Halpern's smile never broke. "We'll see who the shareholders choose." The following day, the board assembled again. I stood beside Father's empty chair, cane steady, voice trembling but strong. "My father trusted me," I said, "and trust is worth more than numbers on a page." Laughter rippled, soft and cruel, but I pressed on. "Last week, you tried to drug him. Last night, you tried to kill him. And you did, but you failed to kill me. And I have what you'll never have." I held up the key, metal catching light. "The empire he built is locked here, and he gave it to me." The room erupted, shouts, outrage, disbelief. Halpern slammed his hand against the table. "That key means nothing." But I heard the tremor in his voice. It meant everything. Behind me, footsteps entered. The stranger who had warned me with Braille. I didn't see them, but I felt the air shift, heard the hush fall over the room. Papers rustled as something was dropped on the table. "Proof," the voice said, low and certain. The board stilled. My ears caught the sound of pages being turned, murmurs spreading. Evidence of the poison, of the signatures, of the plan. Halpin cursed under his breath. Chairs scraped, feet shuffled, security moved. I gripped my cane, standing taller than my 8 years allowed. "You wanted me silent, invisible, weak. But today, you'll hear me." The room froze, waiting for the final blow. The boardroom pulsed with tension, every shuffle of paper, every breath sharp enough to cut glass. I stood clutching the cufflink in one hand and the key in the other, my cane steady against the floor like a staff. The stranger's presence lingered just behind me, a shadow that had chosen to reveal itself. Their voice was calm, unshaken. "Everything is here," they said, pushing the folder closer. Bank transfers, signatures, emails, the sedative in the glass, the contracts Halpin forged. The room erupted. Voices clashed, chairs screeched, men shouted. But through the chaos I listened, and listening told me the truth. Fear, real fear. Halpin rose, slamming his fist on the table. "Lies! Manufactured! She's a child. You'd let her condemn us with fairy tales?" I lifted my chin, blind eyes staring into the blur of voices. "Not fairy tales, facts. You wanted to erase my father. You wanted to erase me. But I can't be erased." Silence fell, heavy, suffocating. My small voice filled the void. "I may be 8, I may be blind, but I am the only heir, and I am not afraid of you." Halpin's breath hissed like a snake. "You can't run a company." "No," I whispered, "but I can lead it. Because leadership isn't seeing numbers on a page. It's seeing truth when everyone else lies. And I see you, Halpin. I always have." Gasps circled the table. Halpin lunged, his footsteps striking fast. But before he could reach me, hands gripped him. Security dragging him back, shouts ringing. The stranger leaned close, their words brushing my ear. "It's done. They believe you." I tightened my fist around the cufflink until it bit into my palm. "No," I said softly. "It's only beginning." That evening the mansion was quieter than it had ever been. No Miss Ruth, no Halpin, no whispers slithering in the dark. Just me and the silence of a house too big for an 8-year-old. I sat in Father's chair, the leather swallowing me whole. The key rested around my neck on a chain. The cufflink stayed in my palm, both heavy, both mine. I whispered to the empty room, "You said I was your eyes, so I'll keep seeing for you." The lion's crest pressed into my skin, a reminder of who I was. Blind, black, 8 years old, but also an heir, a coal. The empire was wounded but not broken. And though I was a child, though they would laugh, though they would doubt, power was already in my hands, and I would not let it go. Because one day, they would realize the truth. The little girl they ignored at the table had become the lion they could never cage.